What would you consider a patriotic act?
I have no idea.
Me neither.
Representing like where you come from.
It depends on what patriotism is perceived as, right? It's nice when people are proud of their country, but I think when patriotism is seen as exclusive, then I think it's not really patriotism anymore.
Would you consider patriotism a good or a bad thing today?
I guess the more negative side.
Patriotism is never a bad thing.
I don't feel like it is a good thing at all. I would like to distance from that term completely.
It seems people who are patriotic go towards like a nationalist extreme.
It's an abused term used to justify things that are wrong in your society.
White supremacy and white power.
It's a really good way to get people to do what you want them to do without them questioning it, because it's unpatriotic.
I wouldn't go around bragging that I'm a patriot. Sorry.
This is the United States of Anxiety. I'm Kai Wright, and welcome to the show. It's happening again, or really, honestly, it just never stopped, maybe never will. But in the wake of the FBI's seizure of classified documents from Donald Trump's resort and private residence, there's been another surge in threats of vigilante violence. And we had a conversation earlier this year with somebody who's thought a lot about this trend. We spoke with conservative columnist Mona Charen. She's a former speechwriter for Nancy Reagan, among a bunch of other conservative bona fides, and has been writing her column since the 80s. Currently, she's the policy editor for The Bulwark. We talked to her after a woman in Virginia had stormed her school board meeting and threatened horrible violence if mask mandates continued. And the conversation that news sparked, it feels useful again right now. So I thought I'd share it. Take a listen.
Mona, thank you for joining us tonight.
I'm delighted to be with you.
Okay, so Mona, let's start with the latest viral video horror, which has been circulating this weekend. I don't know if you saw this story, but it's a video of a woman in Page County, Virginia, at a school board meeting where they're debating whether to continue mandating masks in schools. Here's the clip.
All right, no mask mandates. My children will not come to school on Monday with a mask on. All right, that's not happening. And I will bring every single gun loaded and ready to, I will call every.
Okay, that's 3 minutes. You've gone past your time. It's a policy. Thank you.
I'll see y'all on Monday.
The woman later said she did not mean this threat literally, that she was talking figuratively about opposing a mask mandate with all her might. Now, Mona, I won't ask you to comment on the facts of this case, as you may or may not have followed it, but what, if anything, about what you have heard there from her and in that scene stands out to you?
Oh, it's just, we're so used to this by now, aren't we, Kai? You have people, for example, there's this youth group called Turning Point USA, run by a guy named Charlie Kirk. And at their most recent meeting, somebody stood up and said, because they were circulating the big lie about the election having been stolen, and this perfectly sincere man stood up in the audience and said, look, when do we start using our guns? When do we start killing people? And Charlie Kirk, his response was kind of pathetic, but he said, no, that we're not recommending that because that would just be playing into the other side's hands or something along those lines. Not that would be immoral and wrong. We don't call for political violence, no. But in any event, this is the mood that has been engendered by many things over the last 5 years, primarily Trumpism. But the kind of hysterical resort to violent imagery and violent talk and even violent actions, as we have seen on January 6th, has unfortunately become part of our political culture. And it is unclear what the future holds now that this Pandora's box has been opened.
Yeah. You wrote about this Pandora's box in a recent column. And you pointed to useful stats from the Washington Post that lawmakers were subjected to 3,900 threats in 2017, which already sounds like a lot to me. But in 2020, that number shot up to 8,600. So that's more than double. And it rose even further last year. And you said you've heard from Republican officials, or heard of Republican officials in particular, who are genuinely afraid for their safety if they go against the grain. Is that hyperbole? I mean, what are they saying?
No, that is so. In the beginning, when in 2015, if you will, when Trump was running, and there was this bully boy tone that his acolytes adopted, particularly Roger Stone and others. At the time, it simply took political courage, the courage of one's convictions, to stand up against Trump. But in the intervening time, with pretty much lightning speed, it is now no longer that you have to have political courage. You have to have physical courage, because the threats to people's safety are absolutely real, and they are, everybody who has done the right thing, for example, regarding the election of 2020, if you look at, and frankly, things could have been much worse had it not been for a number of Republican local officials, state officials, and others who refused to lie, refused to misrepresent the results, did their jobs, showed integrity, right? And it's amazing how many of them have either been rebuked by their local Republican Party, removed from office, or had death threats. Many of them had to leave their homes because of the threats to their safety. Members of the U.S. Congress were afraid to vote for impeachment in 2021, the second impeachment, because of fear for their families. They knew they would confess that they knew Trump was guilty, and they knew they would like to, or perhaps like to have voted for impeachment, but they were afraid. So now we've reached the point in America, which I never thought I would live to see, where we are becoming more like the countries around the world that we used to instruct about democratic process, rule of law, peaceful transitions of power. And now we're coming to resemble them. It's deeply, deeply worrying.
You have some personal experience with this. Back in 2018, you were on a panel at the CPAC conference, which is, the annual gathering of conservative politicos and thinkers. And by that point, your opposition to Donald Trump was well known on the right, but you've also long been a critic of today's feminist politics. And as I gather, you wanted to make a point about hypocrisy, that as conservatives, you have to stand up to abusers in your own ranks if you're going to have the credibility to challenge what you see as the excessives of progressive feminists. So you did make that point. And what happened to you?
Well, so I did make that point, and I was booed because I was saying that you cannot ignore the sexual abuser in the White House, and you can't ignore the fact that the Republican Party endorsed a known or strongly suspected, let us say, child abuser in who was that Senate candidate from Alabama, Roy Moore. And so that was in 2018. And I said, this is, you won't, as you just quoted me, you won't have credibility, and you can't. And besides, you cannot, it's so easy to always criticize the other side. But frankly, as everyone knows, when you criticize your own side, you have more credibility than when you're criticizing the opposition. It's nothing easier than criticizing the opposition.
Right.
But it's important to criticize your own side. And by the way, I have to say, some of the most gratifying letters that I received at the time were from people who said, thank you for doing this. I've been a lifelong progressive or liberal, and I hope if the tables were turned, I would have the integrity to do the same thing to my side.
But you had to be escorted out by security, right?
I was escorted out by security. Yes, I was. Although, maybe that was excessive caution on their part. Who knows? But yes, I was escorted out by security. I was dumbfounded because they said, how were you planning to get home? And I said, well, I was just going to call an Uber, and they said, well, we need to have you escorted out. So,
wow.
yeah.
Wow. Basil Rodericks on Twitter asks, what does conservative actually mean? How does Mona Charen use that moniker? What is being conserved?
Here's how I think about it. Of course, there are different kinds of conservatism, but the one that I was always attracted to was the one that was all about conserving the American founding. And the American founding is based on limited government, maximum amounts of individual liberty and rights for individuals. And then beyond that, the conservative worldview is one that is open to reform but cautious, and circumspect, and wants to take everything into account, and is very concerned about process, how you do things, the legitimacy of change, and not simply having radical departures from the way things are always done. In fact, there's an old story that that somebody said, that a conservative sees a fence that, he's on a long walk and he sees there's a fence, and instead of saying, why is there a fence? Oh, this fence is in my way, we really need to get rid of it, would say, there must be a reason that this fence is here. Somebody built this fence and they must have had a reason. And so that's kind of a long way around saying that I regard conservatism as being about prudence, about doing things the right way, about protecting the rights that we all love and are part of our patrimony as Americans. And finally, let me just say, it's about respect for truth. And that has been the most disorienting aspect of the last few years for me, is to see the disinformation that, frankly, as an old Cold Warrior, I associated with the KGB. But the right-wing media outlets have become purveyors of such lies. And you cannot have a self-governing people who are so badly misinformed and disinformed, if you will. So that sort of is my summation of my own conservatism and what I think it can be at its best.
You're listening to a conversation we aired earlier this year with conservative columnist Mona Charen. We'll take a break and I'll ask Mona about her own political development as a conservative. Stay with us. Welcome back. I'm Kai Wright, and happy Labor Day weekend. This week, we're revisiting a conversation I had earlier this year that still feels quite timely. Maybe it's sadly evergreen. It's a conversation with the veteran conservative columnist Mona Charen. She's policy editor for The Bulwark, has been writing about conservative politics since the 80s, even wrote speeches for Nancy Reagan. But her views on Donald Trump have put her way outside the Republican fold these days. We began by talking about the fetish of vigilante violence on the right, most infamously, of course, in the insurrection, but we're seeing it again right now in the aftermath of the FBI seizing troves of classified documents from Mar-a-Lago. Anyway, that's where our conversation began, but it wound its way into an exploration of what it even means to be conservative.
Mona, can we hear some of your backstory? We heard before the break how you define conservatism, but you grew up in the tri-state area here in New Jersey. You were raised by brainy academics, as I believe, right? A psychologist and a chemist who were both Democrats. So how'd you end up a Reaganite?
That's right. Well, they were part of a phenomenon that I don't think is that unusual. They were sort of mainstream, middle-of-the-road Democrats who actually, right around the time that McGovern was nominated, felt that the Democratic Party had gone too far left for them. And so they actually, though they had been Democrats, they voted for Nixon in 1972. and my family was very interested in public affairs, and we talked about everything. I don't think they quite expected me to become an actual conservative, but they were very tolerant, and the fact is, one of the things I worry about is that in our current environment of such heated polarization, the thing that I get the most satisfaction from, and that I think is one of the crowning glories of our civilization, that is the process of debate and argument and hashing things out in a democratic way is under threat at the moment. And I bet that most of the listeners to this radio station have views that are far to the left of mine on many issues, and we could have strong feelings about it and argument. But there's this attitude now, not that I want to persuade the other side that they're wrong, but I want to crush them, and they want to crush me, and therefore we have to kill each other. We have to win. We have to just make sure that they never hold power again, or the country is going down. And it makes having reasonable arguments almost impossible.
But I have to ask about that. I mean, I don't know about the listeners to this radio station, but certainly, I am I'm probably many miles left of you. And, people like to say, right? Like conversations like this one we're having, two media types with very divergent political views, used to be normal and never happened. But I'm not sure, does that really ring true? I mean, we had the point counterpoint TV shows, but I mean, was there really substantive, and I mean this as a question, I mean, in your experience, was there really substantive sort of cross debate where people changed their minds even in a bygone era?
Yeah. No, look, I mean, it's a really big subject. And, I would refer people to Jonathan Haidt's book about how people, I forgot the title right now, but anyway, he wrote a really good book about how people make up their minds. And it's actually, there's a lot of tribalism that goes into it. And a lot of the time we think we're being, motivated by a good argument, but in fact, our emotions go first. And, so there's a lot of research about that. But I would say that, that the tone of hatred, the feeling of hatred that is now dominating on both sides is definitely new. There was always a certain amount of mutual distastes, let's say, but it was still possible, for example, in Congress, for the two parties to come together and say, all right, you think this and we think that, and let's come together and at least craft some kind of compromise. And that is less and less possible, although it's not impossible still. I mean, there are moments, and I think, the infrastructure bill was one, and possibly, God willing, we will get one of those on reforming the Electoral Count Act. So we'll see, but it's becoming more and more difficult.
Let's hear from Elizabeth on the Upper East Side. Elizabeth, welcome to the show.
Well, I always listen to your show, and I come from a very conservative background. My grandfather was Chief Justice, and my father used to argue cases before the Supreme Court.
Wait, your grandfather was Chief Justice of the Supreme Court? Is that what you just said?
Yes.
Who was your grandfather?
And Charles Evans Hughes.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
All right.
That's
Well,
great.
but my father argued cases against wiretapping. He was also conservative, but it depended really. We were raised to believe that it depends on the situation, because my grandfather had a case where he argued for the socialists way back, and he wanted to be fair. And that's how we were raised, to be fair and just. Isn't that what justice is? So I don't like hearing the left view right now. I think that they're way too far over towards socialism, and nor do I like the wackos that you see on the right. You just said it. Something has happened to this country.
And Elizabeth, where does that mean for you? Where does that put you then, if you're, if you feel like there's these two poles and you don't
I don't open my mouth much.
Oh, wow.
I don't say anything because you never know how people are going to react. You just don't. And there's a lot of wackos sleeping on the street. I mean, I could go into how this city is being run too. But that's not the point. I'm just saying that you can't state your mind if you're a Republican or a conservative anymore. People really react badly.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you for stating your mind to us on this show. We welcome your call, and I hope that you will keep calling.
Yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. Very interesting family background there. And by the way, I hope you'll explore the Bulwark, bulwark.com, where I'm the policy editor, and we have a non-tribal approach to policy matters, and it's very lively. I hope you'll give us a try.
Let's go to Josh in Millerton, New York. Sorry, Josh. Josh, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask why you avoided in your definition of conservatism the issue of common good when the preamble to the Constitution not only talks about a more perfect union, but domestic tranquility, common defense, general welfare, and blessings of liberty to ourselves and posterity, so our kids and grandkids. And the whole idea of the common good is an equal part of the founding as well as individual liberties. And I think that should be core to conservatism if I understand conservatism. And I'll drop off here and say thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Sure.
How do you respond to that?
So the caller mentions common good, and maybe some listeners aren't aware that there is a movement out there among people who call themselves national conservatives, who reject the idea of limited government and do so on the grounds that they want to pass laws for the common good. And there's a lot that goes under that umbrella. And I am not happy about that trend, because it seems to me that it is that it sort of has the potential to drive a truck over individual liberty. One of the things that people cite is, that there was this objection to what was it called? The something happy hour. Oh gosh, out in San Francisco, it was drag queen story hour. It was called at the local library. There we go. I found it. And one of the conservatives went on a tear about this, saying that from his point of view, and he's very involved in this whole national conservatism thing. He said, this is the sort of thing that we, really need to stamp out, and it's for the common good. It's for your own good. And my view is you cannot do that in a pluralistic country. That the genius of our system is we let people, to the degree possible, we let people do what they want, and as long as they're not hurting somebody else. And if you stamp out somebody's right to do, the story hour, then when they take power, will stamp out your right to, have religious services, or to have guns, or to have many things that you hold sacred. And so I think there is this. What I am worried about in this tendency is it's fierce intolerance, and it's authoritarianism. It's potential authoritarianism. You have to be content to live together in the same country with people who have views that are very different from your own.
But why do you think so? Someone on Twitter, Lulu, asks a version of a question I have, which is, why do you think white nationalism has found such easy and comfortable home in the Republican Party? And I guess I would associate it with what you were just talking about as well. This stamping out of pluralism in general. Why do you think it has found such an easy home in the party?
It's always possible to appeal to people's lowest instincts. And that's one of the reasons that leadership is so important. There are reasons that we have taboos and against certain kinds of demagoguery. It used to be taboo to make an explicitly racial appeal. Now, I'm not obviously going further back. It was absolutely normal, but I'm talking about in the last, in my lifetime. Okay. And those taboos were important. And when Trump transgressed one after another, starting with, I don't like John McCain, the hell with heroism, I'm not for heroism, and then of course with the, the racial and the ethnic and the rest of it, he transgressed all of these norms. And again, to use that same metaphor, he's letting this genie out of the bottle. these tendencies toward racial hostility, toward ethnic suspicion, toward all kinds of hatreds are always out there ready to be exploited. But a country that is healthy, has a healthy political culture, strongly discourages that and even makes it taboo, as I was saying. And when we repealed the taboo, it's not shocking that we're getting a lot of it. And it's just galloping along. And frankly, one of the things that I find so dismaying is also just the sheer vulgarity of the age we're living in. The fact that "Let's Go Brandon" is chanted at football games in the South, at college football games in the South. That's just disgusting. And
the idea that a metaphor of bringing guns to make your point at a school board meeting is so casual, even if it was meant, even if it was meant as a metaphor and not literal.
No, exactly. So the guardrails are down, and all the sewage is flowing out. If you'll forgive the mixed metaphor.
Well, I don't know. That's about right. So in the couple of minutes we've got left, Mona, in your column, you argue that your prescription to this is what you call more uncorrupted patriotism from everybody else. What do you mean by that phrase?
Right. So I lament the fact that the people who are supporting Trump and who are supporting these, so sorry, my dog is barking in the background.
It's okay. He's welcome on that. They got something to say. We just want to hear him out.
Is that these people who are making citizens arrests and threatening local school boards and so forth, they think they're the patriots. And of course, they're the opposite of patriots because they're not respecting pluralism. They're not respecting rule of law. They're not respecting the fact that other people have different views. And therefore, how do you answer that? Well, we have to have a better patriotism. And it's important for people who still hold, like our earlier caller, Elizabeth, people who still hold to the old standards of what it means to be a patriot, to speak up and say, you cannot hijack patriotism from me.
Do you think, this is unfair to ask with a minute left, but what is the prospects of a third party for people like yourself and Elizabeth?
Well, of course, I would welcome it, but it's awfully difficult to form third parties in the United States. And if there are clever people out there who've looked into it and have some great ideas, I'm open to it. I'm also open to changing the way we vote with ranked choice voting, as you did in New York. I'm open to all kinds of reforms because I think we are sliding. We are really sliding.
Is there any real conversation about another party amongst?
There's
colleagues?
Lots of conversation, but as I say, there are just all of these institutional barriers, and then there's also the right-wing ecosystem of information that's out there, makes it extremely difficult because you have this hardcore of about 30% of the Republican Party that is in charge and that gets oxygen from the Foxes and the Breitbarts and the rest, So it's really it's a difficult situation.
Mona Charen is policy editor for The Bulwark. She's been writing a syndicated column about national politics from a conservative perspective since 1987. Thanks so much, Mona.
My pleasure, Kai. Great to be with you.
And hey, listeners, I've got a question for you. We're working on a show for next week that's all about voting. We are indeed turning our attention to election season gradually. Of course, this is, wait for it, a really pivotal election. And I know you've heard that a lot lately, but it is nonetheless true. And another truism of midterm elections is a lot of y'all don't vote in them. So for next week, our producer Kusha Navadar is thinking generally about why people do and don't vote. And he needs your help. So he's here to explain. Kusha, tell us what you need.
Well, I wanted to find a way to get people into the conversation without requiring like a degree in political science to do so. So
I suspect many of our listeners have degrees in political science,
which is awesome. And we welcome that as well. But for everyone that wants to engage, here's what I want to know. what was the election in your life that got you the most motivated to participate, and why? And that's the key thing. And here's another important element. Here's the fun part. It doesn't have to be a political election. Sure, you could say it was a presidential election, but it could also be choosing your favorite contestant on American Idol.
This, of course, begs the question, what is the answer for you?
I've got two answers. The first election that comes to mind is this is going to be lame. It's actually the 2016 presidential election. But if I think about the election outside of that in which I was most motivated, I go back to 8th grade.
Okay.
Yeah. God, I was running to be student body president. And at the time, for a 13-year-old kid, it's a really formative experience. I remember caring so deeply. And really, that experience has always stuck with me.
There's absolutely nothing surprising about the fact that you ran for student body president at 13 or that you cared deeply about it, because you never know. I have to tell you that. Did you win?
I mean, 8th grade me was very honored to have won that race. I'm trying to figure out how to answer that. All the candidates did a great job. All the candidates.
Okay, so everyone listening, what is your version of this story? Which election in your life got you most motivated to vote? Record yourself talking about what the election was and why it mattered to you. You can do it on your phone and email it to us. The address is anxiety@wnyc.org. Again, anxiety@wnyc.org. Okay, coming up, we revisit another conversation from earlier this year. We go diving for the wreckage of slave ships. Stay with us. I didn't grow up near a coastline, so I was an adult before I began to even think about the ocean, and maybe that's why I've got such a funny relationship to it. Or maybe this is common, I don't know. But I am so deeply drawn to the water and its enormity, the mysteries that lurk underneath it, while also terrified of those mysteries. And not just the sharks and jellyfish and undercurrents and all that. Those physical dangers do shake me, trust. But I'm talking about something spookier. There's so much history in that water, so much lost memory. A new podcast and reporting project from National Geographic invites us to rediscover some of those memories. It's called Into the Depths, and it's hosted by National Geographic storyteller and explorer Tara Roberts. She follows a group of Black scuba divers and ocean archaeologists who are hunting for the wreckage of slave ships. But she ends up on quite an emotional journey of her own as a Black woman trying to connect with her ancestry. Tara, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So this project was actually 2 years in the making, and it all started at the National Museum of African American History in DC when you saw an image on the wall of these Black scuba divers, mostly women, I believe. Tell us about that image and why it struck you so much.
It's a little crazy, Kai, because it's a great picture, but some kind of way that picture, like, it went up a level in my imagination, and I actually thought I saw something that wasn't there. Like, in my imagination, when I saw that picture, it was like the women were standing up on the boat. They had capes on, their hair was flowing in the wind.
Wow.
For whatever reasons, those women, capes. It was literally like the capes were blowing in the wind, and they were standing up there, looking like superheroes. That's how I remembered the photo. And then a couple of years later, I was like, oh, let me go look at that picture again. And I was like, it looks nothing like what it did in my imagination. And it's still a great picture. But there was something about seeing these Black women participating in an activity that I'd never really seen a group of Black women do before. And then when I read the placard about who they are and what they were doing, I discovered that they were a part of this group called Diving with a Purpose, and that part of their mission was to search for and help document slave shipwrecks around the world. And so that's just blew me away. I think there was something about the story that felt really important to me. I thought the work itself was revolutionary. Like Black divers searching for slave shipwrecks. Like, what?
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
And you talk in the podcast, about the power of stories, your belief in the power of stories. Can you talk a little bit about that? What you think is important about stories in the first place?
I think stories are the way we make sense of the world. I think they help us understand ourselves, understand each other better. There's this beautiful quote that Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the Nigerian writer, says, and I'm going to butcher it, but let me summarize
It's
sort
okay.
of what she said. She said that, in essence, stories were the greatest vehicle for empathy. Because through a story, you could really understand a person. You could understand an event in a way that maybe you couldn't before. There's a lot of truth in that. And this story in particular feels really important. And it feels really important to be told by different voices because it hasn't been told before. Like there's a whole bit about the global slave trade, about these wrecks that it doesn't exist in our history books. We're not taught it. So to have these people who are out there trying to bring this history, these lost stories back into human memory just feels so powerful to me.
And I mean, these Black people out there trying to bring this Black story back into our memories seems really powerful in that specific way.
Yeah, definitely. One of the statistics that I learned early on that I always talk about because it really illustrates the power and the necessity of Black people telling this story. So 1.8 million Africans died in the Middle Passage. 1.8 million Africans died in the Middle Passage.
Yeah.
There's no one grieving those people, mourning those people. There are no memorials to that magnitude of loss of life. But then you have these Black scuba divers who are going down, who are finding stories, who are bringing that memory back up to the surface. And that just feels so profound to me.
Yeah.
There's a thing that a historian from the National Museum of African American History and Culture, Mary Elliott, said in one of the interviews that we did with her. And I love it. And essentially she says what she wants the ancestors to know, what she wants those lost souls to know, is that we didn't forget about you. We actually came looking for you. When she says that, whew, it like that is power. Do you know that is a healing circle that's in effect there. Yeah. And that's only something that we can do.
Well, with that in mind, I know you say in the podcast that you are not into church, you don't do church, but the blessing from your mother's pastor and his advice to connect with the spiritual as you do this work moved me. Let's take a listen to that.
As you are doing this work, you're doing it in the outer. That's your research, you're gathering information. That's great. Take it to the next level. Do that spiritual work. Meaning get in tune, if you can get in tune with the essence, the spirit of of our ancestors who were lost during that Middle Passage. Invite their blessing on the work. You can do so by your prayer meditation. You come across names, speak their names, speak the names, and then ask them to bless you.
So just take us a bit to that moment with the bishop. What did it bring up for you, and how did it shape the journey you then embarked on?
It changed everything. Like it added a layer that, quite honestly, I had not been thinking about. When I started this journey, I was really thinking about these divers, like the stories of just Black folks in the ocean that felt like it upended the ideas that exist about who Black people could be in the world. And that felt enormous. So that was my entree into this work. But it wasn't until Bishop Jack, his name is Bishop Jack Bomar from Hillside International Chapel and Truth Center in Atlanta, Georgia.
Name it.
Hello. He said, speak their names. So we are speaking his name.
Yes.
He came to my mom's house to bring her an Easter basket, and I was there. And he said, you were called to do this work. So what it did for me was like it really brought home the possibility of healing, and for that healing to be a healing that travels in the past and exists in the present. So it's like a healing that moves throughout time. And that when that happened, we had started working on the podcast and we were trying to figure out, how do we tell this story? But Bishop Jack saying, you have to speak their names, just clicked so much for us, because we were like, yes, these are not faceless statistics in a cargo hold, which is how most of that moment of time is thought of. It's like all the horror and the violence.
And that image that we all see, well, at least Black people see growing up, the drawing of bodies packed into the bottom of a slave ship. That's what we think of.
Right, right. You don't see individuals inside of that. So we decided to thread these names throughout the podcast. And we also brought in our resident poet, this amazing National Geographic explorer, Aaliyah Pierce, who's a spoken word artist, to help us imagine their journeys.
Can you hear it? Are you really listening?
And not just their journeys in death, but like their journeys as souls, as spirits, as something more than, again, just these bodies in a hold.
Hollow theater made of iron and wood brought together an orchestra of people across the continent. Instruments of human body and voice and ship crescendo into a song of strategy. Sounds of revolt amplifying through the very fibers of the floor.
And as you're doing this diving, as they're doing this diving and searching, I mean, what does it actually look like? What does the work actually look like? Because I imagine, I grew up watching Goonies.
Wow, do you guys realize what we could do?
And you find this whole intact ship and there's a pirate skeleton and gold and all the rest.
You guys, just what if this map could lead to One-Eyed Willie's rich stuff? Maybe. Then we wouldn't have to leave the Goondocks.
But that's not it. That's not the vision. Like, what is the actual work look like?
Okay, I totally have to laugh. I was so expecting you to say the Titanic, but you went to the Goonies.
No, I'm older than the Titanic, friend.
The Goonies is much stronger image. I feel you on that. No, so these wrecks are usually not intact like that. Most of them were built in the 1600s and 1700s. So they were built primarily out of wood. And that means that when they wrecked, they splintered. They wrecked in pieces. And so pieces are on the ocean floor. And over the centuries, coral retakes those pieces. Marine life overtakes them. The sandy seafloor might cover them. So it's really hard to see. Like, it takes a trained eye to know sort of what kind of things to look for.
And what are those kind of things? What are they looking for?
Well, first, the search starts in the archives, and it's the archives that give you a sense of where wrecks happened. Mm-hmm. And a lot of these ships were actually insured. And so when they wrecked, the financial backers and the ship's captains would file insurance claims. And so the insurance companies would come in and investigate, and that left a paper trail. Sometimes there are even court testimonies. There might be crew logs, just a whole lot of paperwork. So historians and archaeologists go through the archives. They locate the area where the wrecking event might have happened. And there are things like particular artifacts that are particular to a slave ship. For instance, you find a huge pile of bricks or ballast stones. That could be indication of a slave ship, because they would use that weight to counterbalance the weight of human beings that were in the cargo hold.
We learn a lot about you in the course of this podcast, and you have a lot of emotional moments, and go on a real journey here. And I want to play one piece of this journey that really struck me. This is a conversation you had while you were in West Africa. Let's listen to this, and then I'm going to ask you to provide a little context.
Breaks my heart that Black people in America have to go through so much in a place where for hundreds of years they have considered as home. Even though I don't understand what you go through, a huge part of me knows that you are also part of me. And if I could, I would help, but just know that you're in my mind in a way, and I know your struggle, and I'm really sorry that you have to go through that, and it's really unfair that you have to go through that.
What happened for you in this moment, and in more broadly, how did this work change you?
It's still actually hard to listen to that without feeling a little emotional. Before this, because of all the things that were happening in the United States around race and identity, like I had this question throughout all of this work, like, where's home for me? Where's home for us as Black people? Can these slave ships help us feel a sense of belonging, a sense of home? So that was one of the underlying questions that I had as I embarked on this journey. And then I went back to Africa, like, hi, I'm here. And I'm not like a naive traveler. I've lived in Zimbabwe before. I've traveled throughout the continent, but this was the first time that I went back with like, I'm searching for my roots, slave shipwrecks, ancestry. Hi, I'm here. And I did not get the reception that I expected to get.
Right.
So right before that clip, Anna is breaking down some other realities that I'm like, oh, where she's like, okay, dude, it's not this one big happy Black family. That's not kind of how we look at you guys. And I was pretty devastated to hear that. And I had to go talk to some friends or a friend to begin to put that into context. And I realized just how much I don't know about Africa, how much I have not thought about it outside of the sort of Western colonial way that we approach the continent. So there was a lot of learning for me. And then Anna says this thing where I was like, she does feel connected. And I just did not know how much I really needed to hear that. Yeah. And what's amazing to me is a number of other Black Americans who have listened to the podcast have sent me notes that moment trips them up a little bit too. And it tells me that there is a healing that is out there for us. So it's still in process. I'm still like digesting, interpreting, processing that, but it does feel like something has moved. There's more possibility in thinking of who we are and who we might be outside of these narratives that we've been given as Black folks.
Tara Roberts is a National Geographic storyteller and explorer and host of the podcast Into the Depths. You can check it out on nationalgeographic.com or wherever you get your podcast. Tara, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This is the United States of Anxiety. Check out previous episodes by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts, or find our whole entire 5-year archive of reporting and conversations at wnyc.org/anxiety. I'm Kai Wright. You can find me on Twitter at Kai_Wright, and you can find me here next Sunday evening. Thanks for spending time with us tonight, and I will talk to you next week.